I would like to call the Gurnee, Village of Gurnee Budget Workshop Number 1 for fiscal year 2020-2021 to order. Roll call, please.
O'Brien.
Present.
Balmas.
Present.
Hood. Here. Thorstensen.
Here.
Ross.
Here.
Garner. Here. Six here.
All right, so this is informal, lots of opportunity to interact and ask questions of staff. They're well prepared and are ready to present their budgets, and Pat will kick it off and
Yeah.
probably turn it over to Brian.
Same format as prior years, so we'll go here till about 6:40, then break for pizza, and then start back up after the regular village board meeting at the end of new business, if we need to. So Brian's going to get us rolling here, start high level, and then work down through the general fund, have the departments present, and then hit the other funds towards the end. So I'll let Brian get going here.
All right, thank you, Pat. Just looking at what we'll cover tonight, we'll start off with the planning and reporting process, and then get into the budget document, sections 1, 5, 6, and 7 as we walk through. Those are have the most pertinent information in them. Looking at the financial planning and reporting process, you're all familiar with this. It starts out with 2 multi-year plans, so the long-term financial forecast and capital plan. We presented those in December. That followed up with the annual budget we're talking about tonight. Quarterly status reports, and then the comprehensive annual financial report or audit at the end of the year. Looking at the timeline, as I mentioned, middle of December, we presented the long-term plans, followed by tonight, a second workshop if needed, and then the public hearing April 6th, followed by the start of the fiscal year on May 1st. Before we get into the numbers and stuff like that, there's one accounting change that we've been talking about for a few years and finally decided to kind of pull the trigger on. That is adding a fleet services fund. Essentially what this does is move the previous vehicle maintenance fund or vehicle maintenance division out of the general fund and into its own fund and its own internal service fund. Internal service funds operate on a cost reimbursement basis, which means they net to zero at every year. So every expenditure in there is offset by a charge back to a department in the general fund or the water and sewer fund. The departments are charged back based on basically a 5-year average of operations, fuel, and parts based on what they've used. Capital purchases, so new vehicles are also moved to this fund. Previously, police department and public works streets vehicles were paid for out of the capital fund, 131. Now that fund is making a transfer into the fleet services fund for those purchases, and the same thing with the public works utility division, which was previously budgeted out of the water and sewer capital fund, is now making a transfer into the fleet services fund to purchase those vehicles. The one exception we have here is fire, and the only interaction that the fire department has with the new fund is fuel, basically. Everything else stays the same. The box out to the right is other AAA rated communities. I just did some quick research here that have the same sort of fund set up, so it's definitely not out of the mainstream by any means. And it's, like I said, it's something we've been talking about doing for a few years now. Major factors affecting the budget. Major revenues, obviously, in total up 1.8%. We'll talk a lot about this as we get through the presentation. One of the things we're monitoring closely is income tax. In the, I guess, legislation budget proposal, there's a reduction of 10% in income tax that's distributed to municipalities. That could be reduced to 5% based on the outcome of the graduated income tax, I guess referendum or whatever it is. So that we're still kind of waiting on to see what happens with that. This year is an off year for use of MFT funds. A few years back, we decided to use these every other year based on the volume of paperwork needed to utilize these funds. So that variance, you'll see that in the MFT fund and in the capital plan. Proud to say we have no general obligation debt, so that transfer from the general fund to the debt service fund is no longer needed. And the aquatic center debt rolled off this year, so that is no longer budgeted in the general fund next year. Personnel changes included in the budget, net increase of 3. We'll talk more about that when we get to the personnel slide here. But we'll see impact for salaries and benefits throughout different divisions where those changes impact. Police and fire pensions, both increased over 5%, and IMRF increased over 10% this year, so we'll see that impact throughout. Grants, there's three primary grants included in the budget. $750,000 grant for the intersection of Route 21 in Manchester. Right? And then $500,000 for this year 2 of the SAFER grant. This is the 6 firefighters that we funded last year. And then $180,000 for AEDs in the fire department. If we don't get the grant, we won't end up making that purchase. That's a 90-10 split. So you'll see that again throughout the presentation. Capital transfers included in the budget. Interfund transfers, $675,000 from the general to the capital improvement fund, based on paying using reserves, or what we thought would be reserves, ultimately ended up being surplus this year, to pay down to pay off the general obligation bonds early. We don't anticipate having any surplus left at the end of the year to transfer to capital like we normally do, so we budgeted $675,000 transfer next year. $350,000 from the impact fee fund of the capital improvement fund. Again, we've been drawing down impact fee funds over the past several years to offset stormwater management. $250,000 from the capital fund of the golf course fund. We talked about this a few meetings ago. This is the major kind of emergency capital needed at the golf course. And then we'll talk later about a plan that we put in place to fund that ongoing into the future. $817,000 from the capital improvement fund to fleet services. That's the new fund I was talking about that will purchase police and public works streets vehicles and equipment. And then $248,000 from water and sewer capital to fleet services for the water and sewer side of vehicles and equipment. Property liability work comp insurance is up 10% over last year, so we'll see that variance throughout in different categories. Fire Station 3 funding, I'll only mention it another 10 or 15 times throughout the presentation here, but that's included in the capital improvement fund. We'll be coming with a formal proposal probably in April as far as setting up the funding for that. So that's more to come on that, but you'll see that variance on the expenditure side and the revenue side to be determined throughout. IEPA loan debt service is included for the first time, as we expect that project to wrap up and the tower to come online here early, mid-spring, somewhere around there, late spring. So that's included in the budget for the first time. As we talked about, the Fleet Services Fund impacts how expenditures are categorized in different divisions that we'll point out. The strategic plan, there is funds included to update the strategic plan, at least start with the selection of a consultant and things like that, although the actual updating of the plan will probably wait following election. And then for the roughly 4 years ago, we put together a plan to fund water and sewer capital into the future, and that plan included capturing a upcoming rate decrease from Jawa, the village's water supplier. There's a 2-year decrease. We're seeing the first year here that is about $620,000 that nets us that we can use for capital, and then next year another decrease as well. So the plan we put in place 4 years ago is starting to come to fruition, and we'll see that obviously throughout the presentation as well. Looking at budget outcomes, obviously another year with no property tax. We were able to budget $300,000 for economic development participation. We've had this reserved in the general fund for 3 years in a row now. This is the 3rd year. We've only spent $50,000 of it over the last few years. Important point, as far as capital programs go, we continue a pay-as-you-go capital program, so other than the fire station, no debt for the capital program, which is huge. Everything we do, we try to align with the strategic plan, obviously. Personnel changes, we were strategic in those. It was either based on metrics for activity, as we'll talk about in the communications center, or pending retirements or anticipated retirements coming in the future. We're able to preserve the general fund balance, and again, obviously, the theme throughout this one is no general obligation debt anymore. This chart shows revenue and expenditures by fund here, and really I just want to point out the right side of this chart. As it stands right now, we're predicting the general fund to have a surplus about $187,000 next year. Again, just a reminder, that's after $675,000 transfer to capital. We do expect that to come down. There's a few things that we have to kind of button up for the final budget, so we expect that to come down a little bit, but still positive with a $675,000 transfer. Looking at the motor fuel tax, as I said, this is an off year, so we'll kind of be I guess, banking those funds or saving them up for next year's road program. And again, there's an opportunity here, depending on what happens at the state level, to get about an extra 500,000. But the state is still trying to determine what they're going to charge to those funds, so we didn't include anything in here. But just know that that could increase next year. Impact fee fund, that's a planned drawdown to offset the stormwater management program. And then the capital improvement fund here, this is spending of prior year surpluses. We transferred 1.2 million last year and then sold an asset, a cell tower, that we can also spend those proceeds to bolster the capital program, which we're doing. So that is also a planned drawdown. Looking at water, sewer, operating, and capital fund, combined drawdown here of 2.2 million. Again, 4 years ago, we talked about drawing down the fund balance over time, also not taking the full IEPA loans, drawing some of that fund balance down to offset, so we didn't have to take the full amount of the IEPA loan. So we're kind of at the end of that process now. So this should be pretty close to the final year where we have to dig into fund balances significantly to draw it down in the water and sewer fund. Looking specifically, just revenues here across all funds, just where the money goes into. General fund obviously is the biggest one, 53.7%. This is where you pay police and fire, so receives the majority of the revenue. Followed by pension funds at 15.7, capital at 14.8, and utility at almost 12%. Looking at total revenues, again by fund here, across all funds, I'm looking at the top green line, up 1.8%. The next yellow line down, governmental funds. We'll get into each of the individual funds later on, so I won't hit on those on this slide, but up 6%. This is led by the capital fund and Fire Station 3 funding. I think that's 4, John, so only a few more. Proprietary funds are down 16%. Again, this is the Knowles Tower. That funding was in this year's budget. We don't need it for next year. And then fiduciary funds are up 5.4%. This is pension increases and the actual return assumption of 7%. So we budget investment income at the actuarial return of 7%. And we'll see more detail on all this as we walk through the presentation. Revenues across all funds here by category, up 1.8%. Major revenue accounts for 44.1% of that, followed by investments and contributions. And again, that category includes the Fire Station 3 funding and charges for service at 20%. Looking at kind of biggest variances by category, major revenues is up 316,000. We'll spend some time on that here in a minute when we get to the general fund. Intergovernmental is up 547,000, about 22.2%. That's the grants that we mentioned earlier. Fines and forfeitures down 221,000 or 10.6%. That's court fines and the suspension of a red light collections program. So the State Comptroller's Office had a program where they would collect, Comptroller's Office, where they would use debts that villages or municipalities could submit to them, and they would withhold it from income tax payments and things like that. They are no longer doing that program for red light collections, so we anticipate that will cost us between $100,000 and $110,000. We are going to look to use our private collection agency, but again, remains to be seen how effective that will be given the decisions by the state here. So, investments and contributions. I think I got some. Get down there. Investments and contributions up 5.2 million. This is again Fire Station 3, and an anticipated contribution from the district. We'll talk more about that later. And other sources is down 4.6 million. This is the payoff of the bonds. We did a budget adjustment this year to pay off the bonds, increase the budget by overall between the two funds about 3.5 million to be able to pay those off. So you see that come back down. Moving to the expenditure side, it's here still across all funds, just where the money comes from or where it is spent out of. General fund accounts for 57%. Again, police, fire, public works, streets, all the major activities that the village has comes out of here. Capital and MFT about 16.4, utility 15%, and the pension funds at 7.1. And then the remaining 5% is made up of the other funds. Looking at expenditures, across all funds here, again, just looking at the top green line, down 2.5%. Next yellow line down, governmental funds down 1.7, about 3% here. This is the impact of paying off those bonds early again, and no MFT program. Proprietary funds, down about 700,000. This is timing of the Knowles Tower. And then on the fiduciary side, again, here is the anticipated pension payments as a result of departures and fire department, retirements, things like that, that we anticipate coming up here. So, and again, we'll see that a little more as we get into those individual funds. Looking at how funds are spent by category here, salaries and wages account for 38.5% of all expenditures, benefits 16.5%, capital 16%, contractual services 12.5%. That contractual services includes the water purchase from Jawa, so that's why that one's up there. And then other at 8.4%, and that includes, other financing uses includes interfund transfers, so. Again, just rolling down categories here that make up that overall decrease. Salaries, up 1.4, about 5.1%. And again, here we'll talk about the personnel additions, in addition to some adjustments to overtime and off-duty security and those police and fire pensioners that we talked about. Employee benefits up 532,000, 4.4%. Here we see work comp insurance increase. The pension increases that I mentioned before, and personnel changes, of course, will impact that. Contractual services down about 922,000. This is part of this. The majority of it is the decrease in the JAWA rate, as well as the motor fuel tax use of motor fuel tax funds for the road resurfacing program, and auto and truck maintenance, which was previously where we would charge things that is now charged in the fleet services. So that expenditure has actually moved from that category and supplies to other financing uses, which we'll see as we go through the divisions. Other contractual services up 186,000. This is where we see the increases in property liability insurance and some additional training that I think Chief Smith will talk about here in a little bit. Supplies down 65,000. This is moving fuel out of individual departments and moving it into the fleet services fund. Capital up 600,000. We essentially swap Fire Station 3 and Knowles Road Tower, so we still have two big expenditures back to back that are pretty close to the same budget impact this year. So, and we also have a more robust water main program this year that we're doing portions of Old Grand, so that's expensive piece. Debt service obviously drops way down. Again, here you see the impact of the one-time budget increase to use fund balance and reserves to pay that off. Ultimately, we didn't use fund balance, we ended up using reserves. And then other financing uses up 240,000. This is interfund transfers, capital, fleet services, those kind of things. That's where you see that activity going. Personnel, as I mentioned before, total FTEs increased by 3, 235.52 FTEs. Changes include the addition of a systems administrator in IT, provide for a promotion and some succession planning there. Reduction of an engineering tech position from full-time to part-time, and we have a budget adjustment that we have to make. We're actually going to reclass that to a civil engineer position, so engineering will actually remain flat when we get to the final budget. So we'll see that that'll actually be 0 instead of a half an FTE down. We'll also have sets us up for lowering some consulting line items and then some potential retirements that may come in the not-too-distant future here. Addition of a part-time records position in police to assist with some unfunded mandates as it relates to records retention, records keeping. They got a little bit of a backlog there. This position's part-time, temporary, going to help us get through the backlog and then reevaluate it at that point. Addition of 2 communications operators in communications. This is one that was the analytics, so to speak, bear out that we needed some more help here from an activity standpoint as it comes to servicing not only our police department but our contract customers as well. And then, so for the final budget, we'll ultimately have a overall increase of 3.5 after we make the change with the civil engineer. Debt position, as you can see, the big spike to pay off Series 2011. There's one flaw in this slide. The IEPA loan will actually start in 2021. So we'll have that SSA final year, and then the IEPA loan will start, and then you'll have 3 years of the IEPA loan. And then, obviously, in '22, whatever ends up being Fire Station 3 funding, debt service. Looking at anticipated fund balances at the end of next year, general fund, strong, over 27 million. A small increase, but again, it's important to remember we used 1.8 million to pay off the bonds. We do have a budget, $187,000 surplus, but again, we budget very conservatively, and historically, those have been, barring any other outside forces happening or any other economic forces happening, those have been, around $1 million, so again, conservative. 911 fund should net to zero. I have to make the final adjustment. That's the second line down there at 37,000. MFT, we see the increase to 1.1. Again, we'll spend that down next year. Capital fund was one that we thought, when we looked at last year's forecast model, we thought we were going to draw that down to around 250,000, and made us a little nervous, but with some of the things we had done over the last year with the sale of an asset and things like that, we can keep that around $1 million. $1 million's kind of the comfortable spot, so we get that right there. And then water and sewer, about 3/4 of the way down there, you see ending at $2.5 million. Based on historical surpluses in that operating fund, it should be around $3 million, and I think that's kind of the sweet spot for the water and sewer fund balance. So keep that right around there, which lines up nicely with the funding coming from the JAWA rate decrease for capital. Moving into the general fund specifically here, moving into section 6 of the document. Overall revenues up $565,000, 1.3%. Major revenues up $40,000. We'll go into more detail on the next slide. Charges for service up $139,000, 2%. This is largely ambulance and some off-duty PD revenue. Fines and forfeitures down $221,000. We see here police fines and red light collections moving down. Investments up $120,000, or 30.6% again. Greater interest investment income as a result of some banking services we made. And until at least this week, what we thought would be a rising interest rate environment, that may change based on what's happened over the last couple weeks here, but yet to be determined. Nope, sorry. Looking at major revenues specifically, there's 9 revenues that make up over 70% of the general fund. Sales and home rule overall down about $180,000, so sales taxes in general, out of a $17 million budget between the two, that's essentially flat. We expect this year to finish just under budget, but we've had some major retail turnover, so to come in flat and have that happen is still a pretty good story. Use tax, this is the vehicle that the state used to essentially have online retailers pay sales tax. Comes back to municipalities through the state based on population. Seen 3 years of double-digit increases here. Expect that to continue as compliance continues to be strong. Amusement tax, not only at the park, but also the other taxpayers has been strong, so we see some increases there. Hotel and food and beverage taxes, again, our most recession-proof, it seems like, over the years, if you look at it historically. Revenue streams here, so we have some basically inflationary increases here. Telecommunications tax, we've seen dropping double digits over the last probably 7, 8, 9 years now. Expect that to continue. There was a settlement with a major carrier this year that gave us about an extra $90,000. Obviously, that's not going to, don't anticipate that happening again. So this is a revenue source we will continue to see decline, probably double digits into the future. And then permits, building permits, we kept essentially flat. Obviously, the timing of major commercial projects can impact that one way or the other. And then income tax is up versus budget, but flat versus the year-end estimate. So essentially, we're saying flat next year. And again, depending on what further information comes out between now and the final, we might make an adjustment to that, depending on what information comes out from various groups. Expenditure side of the general fund. Salaries and benefits account for about 80%. These are impacted by the personnel changes and pension increases. Contractual services down about $390,000. This is moving fleet services out of the general fund. Supplies down $466,000. This is moving fuel and vehicle maintenance out of the general fund, primarily into a new fund. And then other financing uses is down $1.5 million. This is, again, paying off the bonds early, offset by the new interfund transfers to the fleet services fund. Just looking at general fund by department, no surprise here, police and fire make up the majority of it. 44.4% for police, 27.1% for fire. Public Works, 9%, administration, 7.3%, and community development, 5.5%. The contractual services of 6.7%, you see, or contractual obligations of 6.7%, you see there is where we pay for interfund transfers and rebate agreements and things like that out of the general fund. So it's not specifically related to a service or internal or external service here, so.
Okay, this is where we start passing the mic around. So I'll start out with administration. Obviously, looking at the numbers there, this current fiscal year had 1.76 in the budget, looking to end, or 1.764, looking to end 1.761. So basically, coming in at budget, just a little bit under $4,000 under. Next year's budget is up about 10% or $173,000. Looking at the different categories, salary and wages, we have obviously the COLA increases across the board, any steps. We also have a promotion built in there for the assistant to the village administrator to move up to assistant village administrator, so that's been built in. In the employee benefits category, that's up about $46,000. That's our health insurance coverages, a couple coverages changed, and then our IMRF contribution, as Brian stated earlier, that's up over 10% across the board. The professional and technical services, that increase is that money for the strategic planning process to get that rolling. As we talked about before, probably wait until after the next election to actually conduct that process, but we can get going with getting a consultant on board and a game plan together. So we've got that funding included. The contractual services, that's the increases of cost for the CRM and the FOIA software. So Jack's working with the team that he put together in conjunction with IS, getting that built out, so that's coming along nicely. And then 46, the supplies, that increase is mainly some off-site backup and recovery service that we budgeted for our financial software that we didn't previously have in place. So those are the things that are new within the administration budget. When we look at some things we achieved this year and what we've got on the horizon for next year, obviously the ethylene oxide, I don't need to go on that, but everyone knows how much time we've spent on that with the intergovernmental cooperation, our legislative and data collection efforts. Brian mentioned the paying off our general obligation debt, which is huge. We had the Wonder Woman run back in June that brought in about 5,000 runners to the community. So that was a little shot in the arm for us and got good publicity. The Bittersweet Capital Project Funding Plan, we talked about that late last year. As far as really haven't invested anything out of the golf course, looking to take the amusement tax generated by the course and set that aside for reinvestment into the course. So we have funding budgeted in next year's budget to start nipping off some of those projects. We did get the Tier 1 tree removal taken care of out there, so that was good to get behind us. Flood, another flood, September flood, 6th highest on the record, so we went through that. Obviously, floodplain property purchases, able to pick up 3 more of them this year, so that'll be good to get those structures out of there. And then on tonight's regular village board meeting agenda, we've got a couple significant contracts, so Warren-Waukegan Fire Protection District contract, and then the dispatch contract with Zion that'll be before you for consideration. So working with those entities to renegotiate those contracts. Next year, ETO, that'll continue. Alpha Media, the ribbon cutting is March 12th. So you've got that coming up. You remember they've got their 32 events. We've got weekly Gurnee's Got It spots, monthly commercials, regional advertising, brought on a marketing consultant to assist us with that. So that'll be a good project here that's going to get rolling. Ellen's been working hard on getting all the ducks in order for that. Fire Station 3 funding, Brian touched on that, be bringing some options forward. Well, we'll be looking at some option staff and then bringing a recommendation forward to the village board for consideration here in the near future. Bittersweet Capital, I mentioned, leaf collection revamp, so this is a tough year. It's tough when it snows on Halloween and you're trying to get leaves collected. Jack hung in there, dealing with the complaints the best he could. Waste management stayed extra, got all the leaves cleaned up. But we've come up with what we think will be a good different approach to the plan for next year. So we've met with Waste Management, talked to them about it. They're open to it, so we just need to get together and finalize that, and we'll bring that before the village board, and hopefully that'll provide a higher level of service with the leaves getting collected, and then a lot less calls to Jack's office during that time of year. So Fleet Services Fund, Brian touched on, finally getting that into place. Beer Fest 2.0, so that's another project that Jack is working on. Beer Fest will happen this year. Where it'll happen, when it'll happen, exactly what it'll look like, we're still working on. But we have merchandise on hand that we need to sell, so we'll be having a Beer Fest. Obviously partnering again with American Legion, Lake County Honor Flight, Timothy O'Toole's, to get that up and running. So again, we're starting to hold some meetings, and that'll be ramping up here. And then I had mentioned the strategic plan, so get that going here. Obviously, should wait, and we're gonna have an election, instead of knocking it out right before that, wait until we get past the election, have some new people on the board, so then they can share their input as well. So that's what's on the horizon for the administration department.
For information systems, let me start by saying that we're truly appreciative of the fact that personnel change is being considered here. I looked in getting ready for tonight, it's been over 10 years since we had any change in the salaried side of that. In that corresponding 10 years, we have added a few things here and again. But really, the type of work that needs to be done, the amount of work that needs to be done, and really, in fairness to everybody working in the division right now, we need that help. Every year, they make me fill out this thing that says, you know, how old I am and stuff like that, so succession planning is a real thing. They tell me that 2 years from June 1st, I'll be eligible for IRMF benefit. Doesn't seem like that should be possible, but
I'm not
it
sure
is.
we told you that. I think you figured that out on your own. So,
They tell me that they'll send me a check every month, and I don't even have to do any work, so that's pretty attractive. But we need to do planning for that. We need to be set up, and we need to be in a good shape to do that. We have different people in the department that do a fantastic job right now, different skill sets. They're not all completely overlapping. We're very fortunate that we have somebody who is both technically superior to just about anybody I know and understands our business processes in our network administrator. So one of the changes proposed is the job title change to be the assistant director. Ryan Nelson, I think, will be working hand in hand like we always do, but with an eye toward where you want to be in the future on that. So we're appreciative of that in the personnel side of things. Outside of that, really, most of the dollar amounts aren't super significant, except for the fact in professional and technical services, we'd covered some contingencies this year that we didn't have to exercise, and they'll be covered with our personnel change for next year, so we didn't carry those dollars forward. So you see a significant change in that particular area. I listed out a few things that happened this year and initiatives for next year. I'd just like to highlight a couple of them, and then maybe pause if there are ones that I don't cover that you'd like to talk about. But for results for this year, we really changed how the police and fire equipment talks back to our network when it's out in the field. That was a major overhaul of that. I'd say at this point, we're still working out a few of the smaller items that have come up, but that was a major undertaking, both technically, logistically, et cetera. Lots of people helped from police, fire, and inside our division. On the data records management part, I wanted to highlight the patient medical reporting. This was something that the fire department did. We assisted with it, but really that's a cloud-first application. That's the future of how you're going to see more and more of these things go. There was excellent work done by the fire department on that, so that is a superior solution to what their peers are doing. It's less burden on the IS side. I won't say that very often, but in this case, it's definitely that. And we have excellent feedback from the guys in the field on it in terms of how it works. Uses iPads, uses remote access, cloud application, nothing but good things to say there. On the security end of things, I wanted to highlight two things. One, we took some good steps forward in end user training. We need to keep accelerating that, but that's one of the things that you see now that everybody talks about. It's not a technical solution in that particular instance. It's educating the end user base on how they can participate, be a positive influence, and not be a victim on these type of things. The other thing that I'm particularly pleased with is our transition from Windows 7 to Windows 10. You see a lot of people that were scrambling there at the end. We have a proactive, measured, periodic replacement program, and we plugged that in over the last several years, so we ended up in a really good place. Police helped us get across the finish line there with the mobile data computers, and that transition worked really well. I can't thank Sergeant Mann, Ryan Nelson, our network admin, and John Frederick, one of our techs. They all stepped up to the plate on that. But that was a good problem not to have as Windows 7 support ended, and that for those people that didn't make that transition is going to be a security problem for them. Facilities and equipment, we did the storage area network award a few weeks ago. That equipment's delivered, in place, up and running, working between the two buildings. It builds on a similar project we did last year, but it was great to have that reuse skills you already knew to get that up and running in almost no time. And again, the police MDC replacements, that wasn't just the mobile routers, that was the tablets and all that. That was an RFP process. Ended up with a really solid vendor on that. Again, that same group that worked with the mobile routers stepped up to the plate on that one as well, I think with good results. And then there's one I wanted to highlight that probably isn't as impactful, but it's a good example of our video recording system now. We're high definition for those. We did that at a fraction of what some vendors wanted us to shell out for that. Next year, there'll be there's some dollars allocated to work on the sound aspect of that, but I think it was a good example of where everybody was able to come and work together and use what we knew about how our operations work to do something for less money. Looking at initiatives for next year, Knowles Road Tower will have a number of both data connections and improve our radio coverage network for police and fire. Zion Police is looking to move to Starcom 21, which is a great interoperability thing for them. The more important thing for us is it gets us out of their radio problems. So problems that they have in maintaining their radio network will go away. That helps our communications operators. That's the bottom line for that, is we need to do everything we can in support of that. On the data records management system, it seems like we just turned the corner on getting Munis fully implemented. Well, now it's time for a significant upgrade on that, but HR and finance have really taken the lead on that. That should be a smooth transition. Looking at some other Tyler Munis customers, that hasn't necessarily been a smooth one, but it's really well planned out. But it just goes to show that the administration of these systems is an ongoing concern. Police CAD and RMS. Our vendor was acquired by another company who really doesn't, they're looking to provide support. They're not providing anything new. We're working with Lake County on their plan. They have an urgent need. We have an emerging need. We're not on the hot seat for that at all. But people from communications, police, and fire have been sitting on those committees with the county. They're looking to develop one system county-wide, and we're an integral part of that decision-making process. But that's something that really will be in the planning phase for this fiscal year and the implementation phase after that. On the security side, that system administrator position, while not really being primarily security at all, really gives us the ability for everybody else to work on those behind-the-scene things that need to happen. Security is something that affects everything we do. And along those lines, there's, in the capital plan, some firewall equipment updates. Long story short, attackers find new methods to traverse firewalls. They're using secure communications for that, so encrypted communication. We need to be able to decode all that so it can be inspected just like all the other traffic. We don't want that encryption to be a pathway that they can use that we don't have good visibility into. So that's a significant firewall expense in the capital plan for next year. And in facilities and equipment overall, we're plugged into the Fire Station 3 process. We're very grateful to be involved in that early on. And maybe speaking on a personal note, we've done a couple of buildings now, so hopefully we can add some value there. But I know that there were some questions that have come up. I can talk about anything in regards to security now or when we get to the capital plan or any of the things that are mentioned here.
I'm glad you focused on security. That's one of the things that worries me, probably less than it worries you, but that's just huge. I mean, there's not a day that goes by that you don't see somebody being some municipality being held hostage, and it's never from a lack of the work by that IT department, and Chris and his team are phenomenal. It's going to be because one of us clicked on a link in an email, and we saw a good example last week with the Ansel Glink email. You know, and the board got it, and it was, you know, something from Ansel Glink, legitimate law firm that we deal with. Here's your phone, here's your, I don't forget what it was, but download it now. And then, like, 2 hours later, they had been hacked, and that was malicious email to us. So, we all get 100 of them. Well, you can only imagine what staff's getting, and that they might link on. So I know Christopher and his team has stepped up, but that education is just all the things to look for. I mean, I just worry it'll be one of us that clicked on something. But yeah, technology is our greatest vulnerability. We live and die by it. We can't survive without it right now. And these people out there are working just as hard as Chris and his team to find a way in as they're working to keep people out. So whatever you need, I don't think any of us would object to whatever you need to keep us safe.
Yeah, I think that the two key components are that we need to have the staff to operate and maintain and do all the things, even for equipment we already have, so that
Yeah.
you're able to be hands-on with that enough. And then there are some capital or project type things. As things change, the methods of attack change. But really fundamentally what's changed here is that this crypto malware type thing is a profitable business. Hacking used to be something somebody did to prove that they could do it, or because they thought it was cool, or they wanted to get something, recognition with their peers. This is a pure money-making proposition. These are entire businesses that are set up to do this. They're getting insurance companies to pay them out money on a regular recurring basis, and there's almost no chance that they get caught. So that becomes a lucrative business model, and we're not necessarily even talking about people inside the borders of the United States. So trying to deal with those perpetrators is exceedingly difficult, even if you could find who they were.
Yeah, and it's some big cities with big budgets. I mean, Atlanta got hit, Milwaukee got hit. Wasn't Racine one of the ones recently?
And
Gary?
in, I think it was Baltimore.
Yeah,
was one of the biggest
Baltimore.
ones.
I mean, every day I get all kinds of newsletters about mayors and stuff every day, and there's some city every single day that just paid out a lot of money to get their system back, and so,
And sometimes that's not even that they paid the money because they couldn't get the system back. They paid the money because it was faster to get it back through that method. We could talk about prevention things, we can talk about remediation things, but some of the basics, do you have backups? Are your backups secured? How do you handle those? We've had those covered for a long time. We change our strategies a little bit based on what we see where other people have problems. So there's definitely work going on there, but I don't want to give you a half an hour dissertation on that.
but he would be
Certainly.
more than happy if you want to come in and have a cup of coffee, because it's fascinating to listen. I mean, I'm proud of what you do with your team, and it's amazing for a community our size, for the technology that we have and what we accomplish, so thank you. And I'm glad you're taking the succession thing serious.
Well, I think it's really, a lot of what we're able to accomplish is fall out of, this has been a long-term strategy for the village. We've been doing IT for a long time. We've been doing GIS for a long time. The village board, current and previous, has had a lot of vision on that, and we appreciate this.
Other question, Tom?
I've talked to you before about just the financial connections, and you assured me that that's like more secure than these other things we're talking about, but the connections we have to our bank, our banking, how do we?
Yeah, so for instance, and Brian, his people can talk about this some more, but we apply things like two-factor authentication and things like that, so it's not just a username and a password. It's a physical device you have to have for that. And really, finance has probably been the leading division in taking the most interest in the how do we recognize fake emails and things like that. Because one of the things you see outside of malware is people being tricked into doing wire transfers and things like that. In a large organization that's maybe not as well trained, that can really be an issue because somebody gets a thing for a wire transfer, they just put their head down, they do the wire transfer, here they come to find out that it wasn't legitimate. We have some real advantages in how, what level of awareness we have in finance, our size, where somebody's gonna get up and go talk to somebody, you know, they're not in another building or something like that. I think those are things, but from a pure technology standpoint, things like two-factor authentication, that's the thing that somebody can't do. They don't have that physical device to perform that login with that banking institution.
So coming from the bank side to us, so it's not us, but it's the bank.
And we proactively, and Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, ask for those things from the bank. Not every customer takes advantage of them.
Absolutely, yeah. One of the benefits, just to backtrack a little bit here, but one of the benefits of doing the banking services RFP is we get, 7 proposers telling us what the latest technology is for security, and we can pretty much cherry pick the best of what, what was out there. And we did. Over the last 5 years, we've put in positive pay, both for wire transfers, ACH checks. 2 people have to approve everything that happens. Dual-factor authentication, we physically have to have a key fob now that has a number that changes every 90 seconds or something like that. So there's a ton of stuff in place that, we didn't even really know about until we went through the process of some of the RFP, banking services RFP. Now, the positive pay stuff we put in place a few years ago, but that's basically a setup where we tell the bank what transactions to expect based on the transactions we generate, and anything outside of that realm throws a red flag up for them, and they let us know. So unless we've authorized it within Munis, our financial software, to go through the bank, they'll reject anything else, which I think is probably the best defense you can have, so.
Maybe a few other examples, like with credit card handling, we don't store credit cards. We worked hard to make sure that we don't have that information. It's processed, we get the payment, but we don't keep those numbers. So you help with the exposure side of that. And then with the new financial software, we've been making sure that out of the gate, we have least privileges required. So unless somebody needs to be able to do a function, they're not set up to be able to do that function. That's the reduce your exposure type approach in conjunction with the others.
Trustee Thornton, Karen.
Do we have cyber security insurance?
We do.
Through the MICA pool, I believe?
Yeah, the pool's had it for probably the last 4 or 5 years. Every year, they send a risk analysis survey that Chris and his team fills out, send it back in. It's something that we've been increasing the coverage as we continue to move forward, because like the mayor said, I mean, every day in the newspaper, you see these, the insurance company forwards them along. And as Chris said, the big one is employees clicking on stuff that they shouldn't have clicked on, and basically opening the door and letting them in.
And we pay attention to how that survey changes every year, because it starts to give you an indication of these insurance companies know how people are being compromised. So we use that as another indicator for what are some areas that are changing over time, or what are they expecting to see. 100,000 things you can do related to security. If we can pick off the ones that have the bigger impact, that's a plus.
Fascinating topic. All right, if there's no other questions, good job.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mayor and Village Board. So quick to talk a little bit about the public information budget. When we look at all categories, we have a 21.5% increase. Looks like a large increase. It's a very small budget, so any programs that we add or remove will change this budget up and down every year. Most of that increase is coming from line 44. That's our contractual services. That's for a $10,000 3-year contract with Informacast, and I'll get into that a little bit in the future. It's an employee-wide notification software. The other item too, so we have item 45, that's our other contracted services. This includes our newsletter and also services for the village meeting. The increase there is related to an increase in postage for the newsletter, and also looking at a new contract with our printer in 2020, that could include some increased costs. Is that fine? So when we look at the public info and some of our results, and this isn't just in the budget, this is just a chance to talk about communication village-wide. So one of the things we did this year, one of our goals was to form our Gurnee communications team. This team essentially is a group of all of us. So it's myself, we have police department, Tom Hood's on the committee, so it's just a wide range of all the communicators in the village. We get together monthly and talk face-to-face rather than just, emailing and chatting about what we're seeing out there, what are some trends, what are some new software, just kind of a chance for us to get together. So it's one of the things that we've done. In this group, one of the first things that they did is they identified that we needed a new communications plan. Our plan from 2015 was out of date, so we just approved a new one at the December board meeting. So that's continued to help. We've also looked at our increase in our social media. So this January was actually our 5th year anniversary of having a village Facebook page. We have had double-digit growth every single year of having the Facebook page. It's became kind of one of our primary sources of communication. And then the other page that's really grown, as we see every page that we have and every medium's grown, but especially our Instagram page. So Instagram was the story of 2019, 2020. We continue to build that out. We're seeing great feedback from the residents, really good engagement, where we're getting good engagement from our business community and also residents, so we're really enjoying that, and we're gonna continue to grow that next year. One of the things too, so this year, unfortunately, we had a couple of examples where we got to test out our emergency communications. So first, the AB silicone explosion back in May, and then later the 2019 flood. For both of those, we were able to put out effective communication, timely communication, and work together as a team to get information out. One of the things we did too, so we selected GovQA as our vendor through a village-wide RFP process for request and record software. So this software is going to help us. I know I've been speaking about this pretty much every year for a couple years. This is the year, so we've been working on it, building it out right now. This will help give residents either an app or a web-based platform, or even our own staff, a way to create tickets for a streetlight outage. Someone wants to report police activity. What it does is it gets an inquiry to the right person correctly and automatically. So one of the things we've noticed is more and more we're getting online website comments, FOIA requests. People are turning to digital methods, and they want to do it at 9 o'clock at night in their bed. They don't necessarily want to wait and call it during our office hours. So what this does, this helps automate some of that. So they can get some automatic answers immediately, and they can also get information that they're looking for. Now, one of the things we want to share too, and it's always an important point, this doesn't mean that we're backing away from traditional sources. So you can still always call Village Hall, you can still come in. This just gives us another tool in the toolbox, help reduce our staff time, and also increase the customer service. So as we kind of look forward into 2021, this is when we'll actually be launching the GovQA software. So right now we're in the build-out phase, so we're building everything, testing it, making sure it's going to the right people, figuring out all the different form types we have. Next, we'll kind of be in a beta phase, where we'll test it to make sure it works. And then starting in April, we'll start doing some staff training to make sure the users know how to use it. And then looking at sometime in Q1, we'll call it. I learned with the website, don't announce when you're going to be launching until you're 100% sure. So we'll call it Q1. We'll be launching the software to residents, including a rollout of the mobile app. So we'll have a mobile app application as well. So that'll be part of our 2021. Let me see. All right, sorry. One of the things that we're looking to is we have budgeted software to help improve website accessibility. Also helps us find some error links. We have a large website, very robust with lots of good information. Problem is, the information changes, the links die. And it's really almost impossible to keep track of it. Over 750 pages we have on our website. So this software at low cost will help kind of track it. If there's links that lead to a 404 or broken, it'll let us know immediately without us having to search every page. One of the big things I mentioned, we have a 3-year contract with Informacast to enhance employee emergency notification software. So one of the things from administration of the village, employee safety is one of our top priorities, making sure all of our employees in every building are safe. So what this is a one-time payment for 250 licenses for all employees village-wide for 3 years. What this does, it's similar to Blackboard Connect, but it's for our internal users. And what this will do is it ties into everything internally. So our phones, our overhead speaker system, our panic buttons, anything that we have, our computer screens. If there was an incident, let's say at Village Hall, whether we need to evacuate or shelter in place, any employee that has access, and we'll give access widely, almost like a fire alarm, can trigger the system and lock the building down. Every device you have will immediately annoy you. the overhead speakers, if they're there, will announce whatever the message is. Your phone, actually your desk phone will turn on speakerphone. It won't even call you. It'll actually turn on speakerphone and you'll get yelled at for whatever's happening. Cell phone go off. From an emergency standpoint, this is a lot better than getting a number from Blackboard Connect that employees will then pick up, or a message. It's even more robust, essentially. So for this low cost, the reason we've chosen Formacast too, they are a proprietary software with our Cisco phone system. So it's the only vendor that works with Cisco, our phone provider. So it'll connect with those and integrate real well. So this will be a new focus for next year. And again, a good safety initiative to kind of get this out for all employees to kind of help. Because unfortunately, as we know, workplace violence or other incidents are always on people's minds. And this just helps make people feel safer in coming to work. Another thing too, so our Gurnee communications team, we've discussed a lot in the last year about our emergency communications, how we operate, getting some stuff, and what we've done a lot now is we've been really proactive. So we've built out more, we have draft images, messaging, everything's ready to go that we can just plug in place and send out when it needs to go out. We've done a lot of this internally, we're kind of working through it. Our next step we want to do is we want to formalize a plan. So we have a true crisis communications plan. This is a new thing that communities are starting to do. We'll be kind of on more of the forefront of this, but this formalizes in X scenario, what is our response? And so we have it crystal clear, so it also doesn't rely on one employee. So in case, if I'm on vacation, another employee can step up and answer without having to rely on one person. If that person's not available, we don't want communication to shut down. So that's something we're looking for next year, and those are our initiatives, if there's any questions.
Weren't you working on broadcasting board meetings live?
Yes, so that'll be part of our plugin, so that's something that we just have to essentially, I think with the new TriCaster system, set up. So it's actually our new system
Yeah,
allows it, we just haven't tested
We're
it.
ready to test at this point, but we didn't want to say it was, give a date for it until we got.
Oh, no, that's all right. No, it's just another coming
Yeah.
improvement, but a way to engage our residents. As you know, people don't come to the meetings, but they'll be able to, it'll pop up like on their Facebook that, the board meeting's live now and you can watch it. So hopefully that will trigger more interaction with our residents or more feedback, things like that, because they find out after we've done something, and then, so I'm excited about that. I think that's a huge improvement, so.
Yeah, definitely a good option, and it'll also allow us to, currently there's a lot of processing that has to go into the board meetings, so when we get it, we have to process it, edit it. The flip side is whatever gets recorded goes up, so that, if the mics are hot at the beginning, it's just one of those things we'll have to just get used to, is being careful around the mics, because there won't be any editing done to the videos. They'll just be done in one shot live, so.
He meant that for me.
For everybody.
Just as long as they can't have open communication right off the bat in the midst of a board meeting.
Comments are closed in our YouTube channel, and also ratings. I don't want people to give us a thumb up or a thumb down, so.
And along those, as you do more of these things, which will never be in my world, but doesn't that also then expose us, going back to security, to more exposure to having access?
And one thing I will mention, so when we're talking and part of our own employee training, we've been, for the Gurnee communications team, looking at that as well. So one of the things, almost every social media out there allows two-factor authentication. We've been implementing that for our systems too. And that's one of the things I've really made sure to, my own personal passwords have gotten much longer. I've kind of, some of the things that we've thought, because I worry about that too. I wouldn't want our Facebook page hacked and having messaging out there. So we try to do that so that it requires my device here is the only way you can get into it. So they would have to steal my password and my phone to get into our Facebook page. So, but it is something it is expose, extra risk, but it's one of the things I think that we see just in, the current environment, that if we're not there, residents and everyone moves on without you if you're not on the platform. So that's what we want to be engaged in, on the forefront of it.
right, very good. So
And I will be speaking to David today, since he is out of the office.
he has a good excuse.
Yeah.
I'll be back tomorrow, yep.
When it comes to community development and planning building side of things, as you can see from the top line there's been an increase of 1.2% overall. The major change, I guess, that I'll outline here has to do with item 43, which is professional and technical services. It's less than last year, typically because the comp plan is wrapping up, which is the $35,000 consultant drop in that contract line item. And then the last item, obviously, that Brian touched on before with the fleet services change out. If there's any questions
If-
related to that, I'll try to speak to them, but
If I could just jump in real quick, because this is the first one we'll see it on. You'll see that bottom line there, other financing uses. That is now the transfer out of that division to the Fleet Services Fund. So you'll see it sprinkled in and out. That's what that represents.
So for the results of last year, they completed the comprehensive land use plan update, which will be before the board for spring 2020 adoption. Updated commercial building permit fees earlier this year, as well as oversaw nearly 46 million in private construction. It's worth noting that that is down 3% though over the previous year. So for next year, buildings looking to update the codes to the 2018 International Code Series, as well as update fire department permit fees and update and simplify code enforcement regulations. I guess there's certain locations where it might be repeated in a couple different places, so we just want to get it all in one spot and make it easy to find and enforce. And I'll turn it over to myself with respect to engineering. So same kind of thing, running at 99%. There'll be some tweaks, as Brian mentioned earlier, based on the personnel changes for salaries and wages and therefore benefits. Item 43, though, professional and technical services is up $11,000. It looks like a huge percentage, but $11,000, and that's related to going digital, scanning files in. We send that out to be done. And we also have participation in the DRWW group, which comes out of that fund. And part of it is the mitigation plan update that we agreed to. So overall, status quo, but some changes mixed throughout. So moving on to our results from this past year, we did construct the water tower. We didn't get to paint it and put it in operation, but it was built. We also had the Almond Road delivery station built. It is currently getting ready for startup tomorrow. We have the annual infrastructure projects that we typically do, such as the street maintenance, the drainage projects, sanitary sewer improvements, and televising. We finalized design of the Providence Village drainage diversion ditch. So now it's just working with attorneys and the property owner to make sure we can get there and do the work, but it's designed and ready to go. We've completed 3 water system rehabilitation projects in the last year, which was Ferndale, Delaney, and Hunt Club Road. And then we have the routine inspections that we did for our 3 bridges, which will result in fixing them next year. So next year's initiatives include painting and starting up the water tower. We have water main replacement on Old Grand, which will go up First Street and over to the east of Ferndale. And then we have Waveland water main and culvert replacement, the Ferndale Road reconstruction project, which is currently out for bid on the street, the annual street maintenance program, which is about 3.6 miles of rehab and half a mile of recon, the sidewalk replacement project, the Providence Village drainage, hopefully if we get all our ducks in a row there with the property owner, completion of the bridge rehab that I mentioned previously, SCADA master planning, and sewer televising. And if there's questions, I can address those now. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Chief Smith.
Thank you, Heather. Good evening.
That was easy. You got off easy.
There's more slides later.
All right, chief.
I too would like to thank the mayor and the board for your support over the last year for not only myself and staff, but the police department. As you probably recall, I came before you last year as an interim police chief, and with your support was approved as the full-time police chief shortly after May. So the police department expects to come in about 1.5% or $235,000 under budget for the fiscal year. This is most notably related to salaries and wages, which is about $140,000, and that's for vacancies that we had in the department this last year. And then the professional and technical services side, which was under budget related to us being able to negotiate our 2 contracts with the FOP and ICOP sergeants, basically without the use of an attorney. For the 2021 budget year, we do have an increase request of 5%, which is approximately $777,000. This is $381,000 of this is related to budgetary assumptions in salaries and wages. $82,000 of that is an increase in the off-duty security line, and $90,000 of that is an increase in the overtime line item. It should be noted that the off-duty security expense is offset by corresponding off-duty police revenue. Employee benefits is increasing $106,000 as a result of the pension and insurance costs that Director Gosnell spoke of. We do have an increase in our pension fund that was also mentioned, and an increase in our workman's comp insurance and IMRF. We are expecting or asking for a 9.7%, just under 10% increase in contracted services, and this is specifically related to the new cannabis legislation and additional needs at the department for training. And then, I think I covered that all, Brian. As far as the police administration side goes, some results from 2019 to 2020. I did speak already on the promotions of myself and Deputy Chief Gonzalez. We did have a transition in the crime prevention position. Tom Agos retired, and that position was filled with a sworn crime prevention detective, and that's Sean Gaylor. So she's done a lot of work in that position with programs that we'll get to here in a second, but it related to the communications piece that Jack spoke of. We have seen an increase in our followers on Facebook from just under 5,000 to right around 10,000. And her piece that Detective Gaylor put together on the cannabis legislation had over 500,000 touches. So that was a pretty big transition there. We did designate or redesignate our visitor-oriented policing officers to detectives. This was an organizational move that allowed us to really use them or assign them more appropriately to what the needs of the community are and what as they come up. And so that was a move that we implemented this last year. We've had a number of training pieces related to preparing for the cannabis legislation or the changes in the cannabis laws. And we've also moved forward with implementing a program to get all of our police personnel trained in crisis intervention. And so that is something we've been working on for a couple of years, but we made a lot of progress this last year. And again, the goal is to have 100% of our personnel trained in crisis intervention, and for obvious reasons, to make sure that the patrol side gets that training first. As mentioned, our FOP and ICOPS officer and sergeant's contracts were negotiated this current budget year, and fortunately, with the help of Director Palmieri and staff, we were able to do that without the needs of attorneys. Director Gosnell did mention the red light camera enforcement when he was talking about the revenue side. Hunt Club in 132 was taken offline this last year due to the construction there at that intersection. It remains offline currently, and we'll get into some other red light considerations as we move into the 21 initiatives. There's a number of projects that were completed on the facility this year that Director Peterson spearheaded. So we had some new stair treads in one of the stairwells. We did add, and we were able to add some new drinking fountains with bottle fillers. And I just wanted to note to you that as of about 4 p.m. today, we've saved 35,000 bottles in the last 11 months. Wow. So we've also updated and repaired the firearms range downstairs, including the HVAC system, and with the help of the IS department, we're working on a current HVAC upgrade on the control system now. Director Velkover spoke about the in-car cameras and the computer replacement program. Again, a lot of help by Chris's staff and his team, and so we'd like to thank them for all of their assistance with that program. Moving on to the 2021 initiatives, we are hopeful to add some personnel to the Visitor-Oriented Policing Team Investigations Division. We have 3 individuals that are in training right now, 1 at the academy and 2 in field training. And once they have completed their training, we do hope to add personnel to the Visitor-Oriented Policing Team there. We also are looking to fulfill the administrative sergeant position. That has been a vacant position for a number of years now due to staffing. And once these 3 individuals are trained and officer ready, we do hope to fill that position with a promotion from our sergeant's list. As Director Gosnell mentioned, we are requesting a part-time records clerk for the records division, and this is really related to the mandates that have come down from the state of Illinois in the last 2 years, specifically related to juvenile law and the cannabis legislation that is going to require a lot of work being done on those records. And then this year, our sergeant promotional list will expire in the end of June. And so with the help of Director Palmieri, we will need to schedule another promotion system for that. Director Peterson has implemented a 5-year improvement plan with the department. Our facility was built or completed in 2003, and so we're running into the years where there's a number of things that need to be done to keep that building in top shape. And so we are hopeful to have some carpet work and flooring projects done this year, a paint refresh, and a few other smaller projects, but those are all things that are in an improvement plan. As mentioned in last year's results with the sworn crime prevention detective changeover, Detective Gaylor's began to work on a number of department programs with our public education specialist and of Tammy Martin. And so we continue to move forward and build on our Neighborhood Watch program. We have also implemented a senior community program that is basically like taking Neighborhood Watch to our senior assisted living facilities. And so that program is already in place, and we're visiting them, establishing relationships with them, sharing information from the village with the assistance of the fire department, and then we're also presenting them on a topic that is relevant to their needs. At this point, we're basically concentrating on fraud-type issues that tend to hit the senior community a little bit harder than others. And so that's an ongoing program. We've just started last week our 35th Citizens Police Academy class, and I'm happy to report that we are full this year with a full allotment of people who've signed up to participate in that class. And so that's a good sign for our relationship with the community. We continue to move forward and implement a number of school presentations throughout the year. We do have a heavy involvement with our schools and with other community programs, but in particular this year, we've really concentrated on vaping issues, opioids, sexting, drugs, and then parenting in the digital age, which we've partnered with the schools to present during some of the open houses and some of the conferences that go on at the school, where they can come in and they can and get a presentation on how to parent in the digital age, or some recommendations on that. As far as drug recognition experts, we were able to add 1 officer over the course of the last 12 months. We're hopeful to add a second one this summer. That is a very extensive program. It's not short. It is a program in which you have to be selected to participate by a board through the state of Illinois. And so we were very fortunate that this current fiscal year, we submitted an officer, and that's J.R. Nacita, and he was selected to participate in the program. He did go away. He participated in that program, and it's an ongoing training piece that requires a number of labs, if you will, in hospitals, assistance to other departments, and so we're hopeful to be able to move forward with a second officer this year, if so selected. And again, because of the extensive nature of that program, there is a significant cost to it, and that is one of the asks for this year was an increase in our training line. And so we did ask for an increase in training directly related to cannabis and other state mandates that have come down over the last several years. Photo red light enforcement. Most of you have probably followed legislation in the state of Illinois over the last 12 months. There's been a number of proposals that have been brought forward looking to limit and/or outlaw red light programs in the state of Illinois. The most recent one, which just moved yesterday from the House to the Senate, it does regulate red light programs to non-home rule communities. If that one passes through the Senate and is signed by the governor, it would not affect us, but it would affect red light camera programs throughout the state for all non-home rule communities. They wouldn't be able to implement any new programs, and those programs that are in place would have to cease operation within the next 12 months. As we continue to prepare for this piece, and if that legislation changes, and if the state's direction changes as far as red light camera enforcement goes, those are budgetary assumptions that we're working on and looking at and making changes over the last several years. And fortunately, with the construction that's gone on in our community and our intersections being down over the last 2.5 to 3 budget years, a loss of that program would be large, but not as large as it could have been if it was 4 or 5 years ago. And so if they were to outlaw that program right now, we would be looking at about a loss of revenue of around $400,000. Gurnee Mill Substation, you did approve back in December, or I'm sorry, January, moving forward with the substation renew, and they're currently in the process of that. And so we, again, thank you for your support with that initiative and several other initiatives. And that refresh of the substation should be completed by the end of this current budget year. And I know that the visitor policing team and a lot of the officers are excited to have a newer facility out there that will meet the needs of us moving forward. And again, that would not be a project that was possible without the help of Director Velkover's team and all the work that they do to make sure that the technology out there works just as well as it does in the building. And so with all that being said, thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, Trustee Garner?
Chief Smith, as a result of recreational marijuana legislation, what do you foresee as problems that you'll have to address, and how will Gurnee be impacted?
Sure. So I think, we've already seen some impact on the amount of cannabis or the number of contacts out on the street. I think a big piece of it right now is educational and informing citizens of their rights and how they need to legally transport cannabis. We're currently working with Six Flags to implement a policy for the summer before they open, because I do suspect that's going to be an issue that we have to address out there. And some of the steps we came before you a month ago for an update to our ordinance that would allow us to more effectively and efficiently enforce those cases when enforcement is appropriate. And then there's the obvious piece is it's going to be more readily available. And so anytime something becomes more available to our residents, there tends to be a similar effect to being more available to our youth. And so we're working with Healthy Community, Healthy Youth. We're working with our schools. We continue to work with our public education to get into the schools and try to educate them about the use of what I would call adult cannabis. But again, we're certainly going to see impact, and the summer will be a good test.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Red light cameras, and I followed some of the debate on that, and it is amazing how few legislators actually recognize the difference between a $100 photo enforced ticket versus a moving violation. But I have noticed, I don't know if anybody else has, but without the cameras at Hunt Club and Grand, we're right back to no one is stopping to make their rights. At least we're protected on the left. So is there a safe way? And I know you have no officers to spare, but is there a safe way to do some reinforcement of stopping before you make your right turn out there and issue some tickets?
Sure, I think, but thank you for sharing that. I know that we have tried to provide some enforcement and some visibility to the intersections that are under control. That becomes more and more difficult, especially in an area that's as busy as that. But we can certainly push out education pieces through social media. We can have officers reassigned to that intersection.
Can we do it safely, though? I
When
mean,
they're
that's-
available.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that's one of the other initiatives of the visitor-oriented policing team is to assist us with traffic safety. That's a priority of the police department. It has been for a number of years. As we get busier and busier as a community, and this year, the police department handled about 75,000 calls. As we get busier and busier, oftentimes, the availability for traffic safety enforcement is impacted. And so having the visitor-oriented policing team fully staffed and able to assist with those things is important, and that's something that we schedule monthly.
Yeah, it just seems the motoring public is taking advantage of not having cameras there. And how's our roundabout going?
So we have our
I thought I saw something,
3-month, was it 3-month? We have our 3-month study on post-roundabout improvements, and we have seen a significant decrease. Again, we're talking about a really small window of study, so there was, but we have seen a decrease.
all right, so
And-
the improvements have helped, and,
It certainly appears that way.
okay.
I know that we have had less contact with residents who had, for lack of a better term, concerns about that. Some of that could be the winter. We'll see what happens in the spring, but I know that Public Works and Engineering did a fantastic job making improvements out there. And we have numbers that show that there's a decline in issues at that roundabout.
Okay. I wouldn't say it's a success yet, but we're getting closer. Quinn?
Actually, two questions. One was in regards to that intersection on Club and Grand. I know I just drove through it and it had broken reflectors in the middle. So it's not just people driving through, it's people crashing into each other already. Is that permanently down, or do we have to run a new study to bring it back, or is there a chance of it coming back?
Yeah, so we're still waiting for the absolute answer to that question. When 41 and Delaney was reconfigured and improvements were made to that intersection, we did not have to wait for a new traffic study to put the red light cameras back online. We're hopeful that it will be similar at 132 and Hunt Club, but again, that's a decision that's made by IDOT.
Okay. And then the other one, I didn't hear the dollar amount for cannabis training, but I heard the percentage 10. It would be nice if there were a way to secure grants to cover some of that training, since it's an unfunded mandate, so it'd be wonderful if there'd be a way to get someone else to pay for that.
Yeah, so we have two employees within the village that part of their responsibilities are grants. One on the traffic side, and that's Earl Tuckman, and then Detective Gaylor on the police side, looking for grants that are applicable to our community and filling out grant applications. We have a number of grants that are out right now, waiting for feedback. But we did, the percentage, the increase ask in training related to cannabis was $15,000.
Okay.
And so that's the hope is that we'll be able to combat a big training piece of this with that money.
Well, I'm sure that you'd had people on it. I just wanted to at least make a mention of it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, thank you. And I know that you share those things as they come up, and so the more eyes that we have that are out there looking for those things, the better off we are.
Sweet, thank
So
you.
thank you.
Communications?
Communications.
Wait, I have one other question.
Oh, I'm sorry,
That's all
Greg.
right. On the subject of panhandling, are we going to do anything different in the coming fiscal year than we did in the previous?
So we continue to make contact with our panhandlers when we see them out there. We continue to share resources. You know, we share resources related to 211, related to the veterans programs in Lake County, to PADS. We have worked with PADS to come out and bring their caseworkers out. We've had assistance with other agencies. What I can say is right now our known panhandlers within Gurnee are not requesting any assistance from either the police department or Lake County Social Services in general. As far as them being near a roadway and asking for assistance, you know, that is a protected First Amendment speech. And so as far as changing the ways that we have handled that, again, you know, enforcement is not the first option. We certainly have enforced laws when it's applicable, but our hope is to get them assistance and get them off the street and get them the help that, you know, they may need. When that has not worked and we have complaints, somebody who was willing to sign complaints and it's applicable and the person has previously been warned, we have taken enforcement action, but again, it hasn't solved the problem. And so, you know, generally the way that those panhandlers move on is when that particular area no longer becomes profitable. And that just isn't the case here in Gurnee. And so, you know, I know that we've worked on an education piece to push out to the communities. We've worked on it with Neighborhood Watch. We've worked on it with Lake County. PADS has worked on it. There's a number of other social service programs within Lake County that have pushed things out. And really the message is, if you want to help somebody in need, make a donation. Make a donation to one of these programs that are available to help those people. But as it stands, it continues to be the areas we have them in. They're receiving funds, and so it's hard to convince somebody to leave when they're making money.
Understood. Is there anything that can be done? Rumor has it that they're staying at that transient hotels that are right there at 41 and Grand. Is there something that can be done? Well, I'm getting calls that are saying that drugs are being delivered to those hotels. I don't know it to be a fact or not, but and rumor has it that that's where they stay. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but, you know, I'm getting calls, and I was wondering if you had any information you could share on that.
Sure. You know, I want to be careful about singling somebody out
Certainly.
specifically, but we've worked with community development and code enforcement significantly, the fire department, over the last, let's call it a couple of years. Brian Winter in the village has been pretty successful in trying to address the issues that have been discovered to try to gain compliance from any of our facilities in town. We do continue to do some directed patrol over in those areas. We continue to do some directed investigations over in some of those areas. And so we are working on it. And again, you know, it's a team effort. There's a number of divisions within the village that are all working on the same problem,
Thank you.
or concern, I should say. All right, thank you. Police communications. The Police Communications Division expects to come in at about 9.9% or $275,000 under budget this year, most notably that is related to salaries and wages, and some vacancy that was filled late in the year. We've also been utilizing part-time employees rather than full-time employees to try to cover some of that overtime. In the 2020-21 budget, there is a 5% increase, or approximately $138,000. Again, this is directly related to the 2 full-time communicators that we're asking for approval for. In addition, the overtime line is going to reduce itself, and that is a projection that it takes a significant amount of time to get somebody trained up to EMD and CAD certification for police and fire dispatching 911. And so even if we were able to hire those 2 dispatchers in the first month of the fiscal year, it would take more than half the year for them to be trained and on their own. And so we do have a number of overtime needs that would still need to be met, but the hope is by the end of the next fiscal year that we would have 2 full trained communicators in place to assist with the increase in the calls there, and again the reduction for the overtime budget there. Initiatives and results from the last year. Future partnership opportunities, we continue to explore those. You will have a request in front of you tonight at the general board meeting on the approval of a 5-year contract extension with the City of Zion for dispatch services. Mr. Mutes mentioned that briefly during his presentation, but we have a good partnership with them. They're good partners to us as we are to them. We have a very good working relationship, not only on the police side in dispatch, but also on the fire side and on the IS side, as Director Vilkover and his team are involved in a number of these things. And so we continue to listen and explore other opportunities that are out there. But as it stands right now, this partnership is really, really beneficial to both of us. 911 dispatch consolidation, the Quad 1 program, the reconfiguration there was completed, and it's set to be completed in April of this year. Microwave connectivity with the Zion Police Department has been completed, and Pro QA has been implemented. And as far as the fully functional dispatch position in the shift leader's office, we've postponed that related to a change in Windows 7 to Windows 10, and then also in the equipment needed for that. There is a process in place where they're updating, our provider is updating their equipment, and so in order to implement this fully functional center in the supervisor's office, we do have to buy new equipment, and so it would make sense to wait until the new equipment is fully pushed out, because the upgrades are going to be on that new equipment. And so as far as the 2020-21 initiatives, we do begin, this is the last year of the ICOPS telecommunicators contract, and so it expires on April 30th of this year, when Director Palmieri and staff have already scheduled our first meeting with them, and so we are hopeful to have productive meetings as we move forward. We are implementing with Supervisor Brunel's recommendation. We are sending the 2 communications supervisors to some training based on leadership and civilian training that will be beneficial to them in their positions. Director Velkover talked about Starcom radio already with Zion, so I won't discuss that any longer or anymore, except that it's clearly needed. And then the consortium is moving forward in Lake County. In particular, we're interested in the CAD and RMS, and then the 2 additional telecommunicators that we're asking for in the budget. Again, police communications is a busy place. For those of you that are familiar with the operation there, they handled a little bit over 123,000 calls for service this year. That includes both police and fire. In addition to those 123,000 calls for service, they handled an additional 40,000 911 calls. And in addition to those two numbers, they were involved or touched an additional 100+ thousand administrative calls. Those are calls that come into our building and either get pushed off to a police officer or to records or to administration. And so in total, they are involved in about 264,000 calls a year. And so it's a busy place, and we appreciate all the work that they've done, but we appreciate your support. With that, any questions that you might have?
You and I had talked about NGOs. Did you put anything in your budget?
Non-government organizations. We had not budgeted in particular for those things.
All right.
But if those are programs, if we move forward with.
So, Brian and I would like to continue to support 211, but I don't know how much would be appropriate, but they're doing an amazing job for our residents. And there's many organizations that the police department relies on too, PADS being one of them, where we're expecting a not-for-profit to be our backup or our support system. And we've had a conversation, there should be a way for us to support those. But I don't know that we'll get it done during the budget process. but-
Brian has a list of things for the final budget, and that was one of the things that him and I were gonna talk about. We have contingency funding already built in the budget, not specifically for a 211 donation, but that is on our list to talk about for the final budget.
So maybe
putting a
we
dollar
leave it
amount
in
to that.
contingency and we do a committee of the whole at some point after we get through this, and, because there has to be some oversight to what we're donating. I mean, obviously, it's tax dollars, so donation may not be the right, but we are getting support from nonprofits to do services that we can't fund ourselves. So I think a discussion and how we may want to support them. The 211 is paid off in spades, would be at the top of my list, and Brian brought up several that lend a tremendous amount of help to the police department. And you would not want to see those organizations go away or not be able to support us, so we'll leave it in contingency. I wasn't sure if you were going to do anything or not this year, and then maybe we can do that as a committee of the whole. How should we do that, and what would be appropriate, and what would be our guiding principles in making those decisions, so it's not just somebody's pet cause or something. Okay, all right,
All right,
okay.
We're at a break
We're
point.
halfway through, so you guys will come later.
we probably have another 25 minutes left that we'll do at the end of new business, so I looked at how long it took last year. We didn't get quite as far as we got the first half here, but fire and public works, when we come back and then run through the other funds, that go pretty quick, so we'll break now for food and then be
Yeah,
back at 7
all
for the regular
all
meeting.
good stuff. I know that I can speak for the board. We love hearing this and everything that got done and everything we're going to do, so. All right. So do I,
You need a motion to adjourn? Andy? Huh?
Yep.
Yeah?
all right,
Okay.
do I have a motion to adjourn our budget hearing number 1 and continue it during our regular
So
meeting?
moved.
Motion by trustee Ballmer, second by trustee Thorstensen. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right.